So the next of the code is minimize harm, the second of the four. And ethical journalism treats sources, subjects, colleagues, and members of the public as human beings deserving respect. Meaning, you need to realize that the people you report on, the people you work with, everybody is a person. And don't ever lose track of that. The reality is if you see somebody who's doing something wrong, it's easy to just be like, oh, I'm gonna throw the book at them, right? I'm gonna harm them. But remember, they are people. And one of the things that they oftentimes say is, one of the things that one of my favorite journalism professors used to always say was, and I'm slowly getting to the point where I can just say it because I've been a journalism professor long enough, but one of the things favorite things was, a press is an awful heavy thing. A printing press is an awful heavy thing, especially when you drop it on somebody. And the idea there is that, oftentimes as journalists, we want to drop the press on people. Somebody's been arrested, somebody's done something wrong. Well, that they wanted to do something, they should have done something wrong if they did. Well, in today's day and age, with the internet, if you put a story out there about Joe Schmo and how he committed a crime, it's going to be there for the rest of his life. Even if what he did ends up wasn't that significant. Even if what he did was something that was a stupid, youthful mistake. That, some kid, does something and, busts mailboxes. And then 50 years from now, people are going, oh, did you know they did that? They go to school and somebody Googles them, or they're going to go on a first date or something. And the person says, I don't want to go out with them. They apparently have they have this record or whatever. Even though maybe it never became a conviction. Maybe it never became anything. Maybe they did something wrong. Maybe they stole from a job and now nobody will hire them because it's in the paper or because it's online. And I'm not saying that if somebody does something wrong, you shouldn't hold them to account. I'm just saying, be very, very careful. Don't just throw it at people. Don't just print everything because you know it. Don't just do it. Be aware that people make mistakes and you need to have that understanding. I know people who have, committed crimes or been convicted of crimes who I wouldn't think twice about, having them in my home. I wouldn't think twice about hanging out with them or having them watch my children. But you know what? That's because that was something they did that was not, that is not, I think that we oftentimes are quick to label people because it's a safe thing to do. And as a journalist, our problem is that when we publicize that, we taint them for life. We potentially taint them. And we need to recognize the possible harm from that. Now, does that mean we shouldn't do it? No. It just means we need to be careful about how we do things. So, first one, journalists should balance the public's need to information against potential harm or discomfort. Pursue the news is not licensed for arrogance or undue intrusiveness. So, the idea there is just because people want to know stuff, especially lurid details, doesn't mean you need to just go out there and just push your way in, stand on people's front lawns. I mean, you can do it, and I don't have a problem necessarily with it, but don't be overly arrogant. And the people's need to know really needs to be measured against who the person is. For example, those in power we probably treat differently than those who aren't. For example, if a politician, if a congressman like Rodney Davis or I think Shimkus or whoever is caught doing something wrong, then it's probably a case that we could probably go to more extreme levels to get that information, to be more intrusive. But if it's just, somebody on the corner who does it, it's probably not worth going to that same level, right? I mean, if Rodney Davis gets a DUI in the morning, we should report it. If your neighbor gets a DUI in the morning, well, I mean, I'm not excusing your neighbor, and your neighbor's made a bad decision, but I don't know that it needs to be on the front page. Whereas if Rodney Davis does it, probably should be, because, he's somebody who is a politician who makes laws and should be upholding them, not breaking them like that. And so I'm not saying that any of these things are true. I'm not saying that he has done that by any means. I'm just saying that if it was the case, if Governor Ronner was caught for DUI tomorrow, we need to put that on there. If, whoever it is, if Donald Trump was, and best I know, he doesn't drink. And so the case is you need to balance the public's need for information against the harm. Don't just print it about anybody, but also realize that when it needs to be done, you need to do it, but don't just do it to do it. Show compassion for those who may be affected by news coverage. Use heightened sensitivity when dealing with juveniles, victims of sex crimes, and sources of subjects who are inexperienced or unable to give consent. Consider cultural differences in approach and treatment. With children, with people under the age of 18, we always have to be careful because people make mistakes when they're young. And we don't need to print saying if some 16-year-old does something, recognize that that's just something 16, 17, 18-year-olds do. And that we don't want to sully them with a negative news story that will follow them the rest of their lives. And so we need to be careful of that. Victims of sex crimes. Don't print, Laura Smith was raped, or Joe Smith was arrested for raping his daughter, something like that, because that names his daughter. You need to be very careful with things like that, because even though people shouldn't, people do judge the victims of sex crimes. Like, oh, did you know she was a victim of sex crime? I don't think you should go dating her because, she's had some stuff happen. Things like that. And that ends up victimizing the person. And so you need to be very careful. Even though I'm not saying that that's the right thing, I'm saying that that is oftentimes what happens. And the other thing is it says, and sources or subjects who are inexperienced or unable to give consent. If a person is mentally incapable of giving consent, you need to be careful about using things from them. If they are inexperienced, you need to be careful. Don't treat somebody who is, hasn't been to college, has no media experience, no media savvy, the same way you would treat somebody. Like, for example, I have a degree in journalism. I've worked as a journalist. I work for the government. I have a pretty decent position, blah, 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 right? If you come to me and ask me a question, I know perfectly well, if you've announced yourself as a reporter, I know that what I'm saying can be used. And I know to be very careful. Okay? I know not to let myself get comfortable. But people who haven't done that, who aren't aware of that, oftentimes let their guard down. And they say things they shouldn't. And you need to be careful about that, because the reality is you can make somebody look really stupid, really bad. You can make them look like a jerk, and it can end up hurting them. As an example of this, I remember one time we were doing a story. This has been years ago, because it was back when Illinois decided to go to all indoor smoking ban. So this has been years ago, because many of you don't remember smoking in restaurants and things like that. And one of our reporters went out, and they went to this restaurant that was known as kind of a place where a lot of people went and smoked. And they served a lot of fatty foods and things. And she talked to a waitress who was a smoker. She's 18, and she started smoking when she was like 12. And she quotes the waitress as like, "I's be known good at smoke," just very much like the language was, incomplete sentences. There was no verb subject agreement. I mean, it was kind of sound like a hick, an uneducated person saying really kind of things where like, "I likes me smoking," it wasn't that bad, but, and it just came across as much, and they wrote it almost like they were writing Huck Finn, where, somebody says, "I get that," they spell it G-I-T instead of get, which, we're in Illinois. I mean, people say get, they don't say get. People don't use pens, they use pins around here. People mispronounce the E all the time as an I. But yet the reporter wrote it that way. And a few weeks later, that reporter wasn't doing the story, and somebody wanted to do a follow-up, and they went in and they said, "We're not talking to your reporter from your place because you guys made her sound like a real idiot," right? And that's the case. I mean, here's a person who is not experienced, who's not a well-educated person. He's a person who probably dropped out of high school and works as a waitress and started smoking at 13, probably didn't have the best family life, has like a 2-year-old, got pregnant at 16. This is a person who probably you need to be careful when you are dealing with them. You need to show compassion for them, because you need to not just treat them as you would, like, for example, if the President of the United States were to talk that way, then fine, spell it the way they wrote it. Be frickin' Mark Twain and pretend you're writing Huck Finn and spell G-E-T-G-I-T because that's the way he said it. That's fine. If I say it that way, go ahead and do it. I'll be annoyed that you did it, but at the end of the day, I know I mispronounce words sometimes. That's what I do. Okay? As I grew up in Illinois, and I sometimes say get instead of get. And I sometimes say things like, "I'm going to wash my clothes." I don't say that, but people do. I sometimes talk about eating fish and washing the dishes, and the case is that I Recognize that. And I know better than that. And if I make that mistake, then you can hold me to account. But don't treat everybody the same. Show compassion for those who are affected. Be careful not just to run into people's lives and expect victims to talk to you. Don't just expect and treat, criminals and everybody the same. Don't just, do that. Be sensitive. Be aware that these people may not be on their best day. This is a routine day for you, but it's not for them when they're dealing with the media. And you need to treat them with respect and regard and realize that they're not all the same. Recognize that legal access to information differs from an ethical justification to publish or broadcast. Meaning just because you get a name, just because you get the address of somebody who committed a crime or a politician or something else, doesn't mean you need to tell everybody. Even though that may be legal information, doesn't mean you need to do it. Why? Because, that's not saying everybody needs to know. That could cause that person harm. Just because you know what my salary is doesn't mean you should put it on the front page of the paper. Just because you know, every little thing I ever did, just because you know every little fight I ever, just because you can get this information and it's all legal, doesn't mean you should print it. Just because you can get somebody's tax return, Donald Trump's tax return, doesn't mean you should print it. Now, I think with politicians, like a president, you probably should print it if you get a hold of it. But that's different because that's the president, and we hold different people to different accounts. Realize that private people have a greater right to control information about themselves than public figures and others who seek power, influence, or attention. Weigh the consequences of publishing or broadcasting personal information. Once again, if your neighbor gets caught for DUI tomorrow, probably not going to be front page. If a governor does, front page. There's a difference. And people in public positions, we have a greater expectation. Teachers, if a teacher gets arrested for sexual assault, that's probably front page news. If your neighbor does, it's probably news, but it's probably not front page news. But a teacher works alone with minors, or works alone with young people, works alone with people. And so, or may not work alone, but at least works with people and may be in a position where they are given a trust and may be given, individual access, student may stay after school, or maybe alone in a building or other things with people. And so that's something people deserve to know. And so we need to realize that public figures, people who seek influence, people in certain positions, we treat differently because of their position or because of their place. Avoid pandering to lurid curiosity, even if others do. Just because other publications are going out and printing the sex lives of other people or of celebrities doesn't mean you should. People like to know it. I'm curious about these things. I'm curious to hear about lurid details as much as the next person. But as a reporter, we shouldn't just give into that. Our job should be to be above that. If you want to go work and be a tabloid journalist, that's fine. And I'll be happy to buy and read your stuff because I like lurid information. But it doesn't mean you really should be. I don't agree with it. I don't think you're an ethical journalist. I don't have as much respect for you as a journalist. But that area, that niche does exist. Balance the suspect's right to a fair trial with the public's right to know. Consider the implications of identifying criminal suspects before they face legal charges. I'm going to stop this because I don't know how long this is and I don't want to go too far.